Trey Hendrickson to Cleveland? Yeah, that's a thing. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Did Kevin Stefanski give away at least part of the Browns' plans for the quarterback room? Plus, the Bengals are listening to offers for Trey Hendrickson, apparently, and the Browns are apparently calling. And who is the odd man out in the wide receiver room right now? First, though, I do want to thank you for being on every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just make sure you hit the subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcast, and, of course, at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And Kevin Stefanski will reveal his quarterback, his starting quarterback, I should say, this week. He wants to tell the team first is kind of the gist of that conversation. We talked to him on Sunday, one day after the game, obviously, and that was what he sort of made clear, was that the decision is coming, but that he's going to tell the team first, and the team is expected to be in on Monday, and we'll go from there in terms of when he's going to finally tell the media. I would guess Tuesday when they return to the practice field. He also told everyone, as expected and as we all anticipated, that this week of practice was going to be treated like a normal game week. This is what he tends to do. Aside from last year, when there was the whole debacle with Deshaun Watson dealing with shoulder soreness and not playing and all that, every other year they have generally treated this third preseason game as a, quote, final dress rehearsal and sort of get everybody in rhythm of what a normal game week is going to feel like and look like. And so that's what he's doing this week. They'll practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, have Friday off, and then have a game on Saturday at home, obviously, over at the stadium. And they'll be on their way. So, I think this all makes sense in terms of the structure. I think even though he's not ready to share who the starting quarterback is, I don't think it's a surprise at this point. I think everyone should be anticipating and is anticipating that it's going to be Joe Flacco. He's been the one quarterback that stayed healthy this entire time. He's been the one quarterback who's been consistently out there taking reps with the first team. It's not surprising that it would be him, and it's likely to be him as they prepare for the start of the regular season. And listen, when you get to this stage of training camp in the preseason, that's what it's ultimately about. It goes away from quarterback competitions and, other competitions that are taking place across the roster and more to, all right, we got to finalize this thing because we have games to actually play for, meaningful games to play for in a couple weeks, and we need to put the best team together to try to win those games. So it makes sense that he handles it this way, and I am anticipating that Joe Flacco gets announced as the starter. What I do think is interesting, though, is how Kevin Stefanski answered whether or not they'll consider keeping 4 quarterbacks. I'm going to play you this clip here. I'll let you be the judge to a degree on what you think he means by this, but I'll explain what I thought here on the other side.
I think we'll let it play out as we get closer to the cut down. Those are all conversations that we are always having, but those are tough decisions. I'd like to keep everybody, but not realistic.
So what I thought was interesting about that is Kevin Stefanski is normally like the biggest redirect guy out there when it comes to how he answers questions. Like he is truly a tactful politician in these situations. And normally you'll hear him like, hey, this goes for all our positions. We'll let it get closer to the cut down and then we'll figure out what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah. But he stuck to the position group I asked him about. I asked him about the quarterbacks and keeping 4 specifically, and he stuck to that group and said, yeah, these are tough decisions. I'd like to keep everybody, but it's not realistic. And that's what I found so interesting was the fact that he didn't just deflect to every position group. We have things we have to sort of figure out. Every position group has questions. Every position group is going to make for some tough decisions that we have to make on the roster. No, he was okay answering like, yeah, with the quarterback room, we'll get closer to the cut down. I'd like to keep everybody, but it's not realistic. And so it made me sort of start to question, is keeping 4 quarterbacks really realistic? And to this point, I had mostly been saying throughout training camp that I didn't think they would do it. Then I sort of pivoted the last week or so because I was doing the math on all this, and I was just like, listen, there's no way they're not keeping these 2 rookies. Shedeur Sanders looked really good in his preseason start. Dillon Gabriel, not as good as Shedeur Sanders in his first preseason start, but showed some promise in terms of running the offense, and they took him earlier in the draft. They believe in him. They're not going to just punt on a 3rd-round pick this soon in his developmental process. So with all those things in mind, I'm like, there's no way they're moving on from the rookies. Joe Flacco is about to be named the starter for your team, so you're not going to move on from Joe Flacco. So the only other option is Kenny Pickett the odd man out, which is what I always thought this would come down to. But again, as I thought more and more about Kenny Pickett, the big thing I keep going back to is they traded a 5th-round pick for this guy and Dorian Thompson-Robinson for what it's worth. Like they gave up a decent haul, a thoughtful haul. Like it took some. Giving up draft capital is never something teams want to do, plan on doing, all those different things. So these teams cling to these picks like they're gold, whether they're a 5th-round pick or a 1st-round pick. So to do that, you were bringing in a guy that you thought was going to be part of your team. And so I just have a hard time believing that they're going to just part ways with Kenny Pickett without him even playing a game for the Browns after giving up what they gave up for him in terms of the draft capital piece of this. Now, maybe they already have put some feelers out that somebody would be willing to trade for Kenny Pickett, and that's why Kevin Stefanski answered the way he did. I don't know. But and it's not that far-fetched in the grand scheme of things. They kept 4 quarterbacks last year, at least through the cut down, and then, whittled this thing down a little bit further. And that was originally what I said I thought would happen, that they keep 4 through the cut down and then try to find a way to move off of 1 before the regular season. But now I've been more so thinking they'll keep 4 to start the regular season and maybe maybe later on down the line, a trade can be consummated that allows you to move off of somebody, and it would most likely be Kenny Pickett, I would guess. But now because of this answer, I found it so interesting that Kevin Stefanski actually kind of gave you something that was thoughtful. Maybe his answer wasn't thoughtful, but it felt like he gave it thoughtful, like it felt like he was giving it some thought as he was answering the question. Like just the idea that maybe they can't keep all these guys and that there's other roster positions that they have to consider before just saying, yeah, you know what, we're going to keep 4 quarterbacks. So an interesting response from Kevin. It almost makes me wonder if they are going to if they're going to not keep 4 based on what he sort of said there. But I still think ultimately I just don't know how unless they again have a trade partner sort of lined up or they know somebody who's interested in Kenny Pickett. I don't know how they move off of any of these guys at this juncture because of what's kind of gone into them being here at this point. The rookies aren't going anywhere. Joe Flacco's not going anywhere because he's your week 1 starter. And then Kenny Pickett, you gave up draft capital for him. Are you willing to part with him so soon? I don't know. But I thought that answer from Kevin Stefanski was maybe more revealing than most things that he says. And it's given me something to think about here as we watch this final week of practice and the preseason. And we see where Kenny Pickett, I guess, is at in terms of coming back into the fold here, potentially from this hamstring injury that's lingered throughout most of camp after the first 4 days. We'll see how they sort of handle these things. And if he has a chance to get back into the conversation, what that looks like. But yeah, it sets the stage for the number one, the starting quarterback role is not a question at this point. But what is a question is what the depth chart looks like the rest of the way behind him. And if Kenny Pickett's part of their plans, he might be number 2. If he's not, then we're talking about the Dillon Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders debate that we always like to have. But I just thought it was a little interesting that Kevin Stefanski actually kind of gave an answer that alluded to not being able to keep all 4 quarterbacks. And he normally doesn't do things like that. Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson. Only in your dreams. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything. cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? So much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real, personalized guidance instead of just guessing based off of something that you saw on social media. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. That's million with an M, and it's easy to fit into your schedule. Just click to connect, and you can even switch therapists anytime you need. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So the relationship between Trey Hendrickson and the Cincinnati Bengals has officially deteriorated to a point that they are now listening to offers for him, according to multiple reports via Sunday. Jordan Schultz is one of the first to report some of the teams that seem interested in the reigning sack leader in 2024. And we'll talk about those teams specifically here in a second, because the Browns were listed as one of them. But I will say, like, in the beginning of this, it just seemed like another one of those situations that would get sorted out like most contract disputes do. The same way Myles Garrett did, the same way it seems like Terry McLaurin is going to finally get sorted out. He was activated off the PUP list over the weekend, which sets the stage, it seems like, for him to now sign a contract, come back, be at practice, be involved, all those things. So I just kind of figured, they'll get it figured out. But at the same time, the Bengals are notoriously cheap. And so here we are. This is where we are. They're not able to pay people the same way that Jimmy Haslam's willing and able to pay people. And so for that reason, they have sort of lost cash. They've lost cash flow to pay all these different players on their team. And what I find interesting about this entire thing from a Browns lens, sure, is that, like, I thought all along that their move this offseason should have probably been to pay Trey Hendrickson and try to find a number 2 wide receiver elsewhere instead of paying T. Higgins. That felt like the prudent thing to do. I get that you're trying to keep Joe Burrow happy. I get that you like having the 1-2 punch of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but your defense was kind of a disaster last year. And the one staple, the one thing you could count on was that Trey Hendrickson was going to show up, and that Trey Hendrickson was going to get sacks, and that Trey Hendrickson was going to make plays for you. If you lose him, what is the identity of your defense? A defense, mind you, that was already really bad last year, and that's the biggest reason you missed the playoffs. Can Joe Burrow do it all by himself? Probably not. You need a defense that at least can sort of balance some things out and help the cause. We saw the Bengals lose some shootouts last year because of this, and that's another reason why I thought that this would just all get sorted out. I was like, they're not going to not pay Trey Hendrickson. They're going to get this resolved. They're going to keep their best defensive player. But here we sit about 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks out from the start of the regular season, and still no deal for Trey Hendrickson, despite the fact that he showed up to camp. He is still not practicing, and now it's reported that the Bengals are listening to offers for him. So what does all this mean? Well, the Browns were listed as a team by Jordan Schultz of Yahoo Sports that has interest in Hendrickson and is at least picking up the phone and making that call. And listen, it would be a dream for Browns fans for Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson to play on the same defense opposite each other here in Cleveland. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a defense that was headlined up front? A defensive line, by the way, that just spent this last week dismantling the Eagles, the reigning Super Bowl champions, because their defensive line was so damn good. Can you imagine that defensive line with Trey Hendrickson inserted into it? And now all of a sudden, being part of this unit to help, Myles Garrett on the opposite side and being sort of his partner in crime. I'm not going to tell you not to dream. I'm not going to tell you not to think about what that will feel like, look like, all those things. It would be special if that actually happened. But there is no chance in hell that it's going to happen, because the Bengals will never send him inside the division. They just won't do it. Listen, I understand they don't want to pay Trey Hendrickson, Part of it is just, I think, cash flow. The Bengals can't pay everybody. The same way other teams can. But like sending him within the division so that he can potentially haunt you 2 times a year for however many years down the line here would just be, I mean, that would be fireable. That would be get out the torch and pitchforks and get run out of town. Like that's just not what you want to do. And so the idea that they would actually send him within the division is crazy to me. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's probably far-fetched to think they send him in the AFC largely at all. Cause I'm sure a team like the Bills, for example, is interested, but the Bills are one of these teams that has a franchise quarterback like you if you're Cincinnati, and you can't possibly help that team out, a team that you might face in the playoffs, by giving them a pass rusher of that caliber. And so it almost feels like if this is going to happen, if they're actually going to trade him, that a team in the NFC makes the most sense. That's probably where he should end up and will end up and all these different things. And so I feel like that's probably the path that ends up happening here if he gets traded, is that they look at an NFC team and say, all right, we'll send you here. But I understand where Browns fans want to dream about the possibility of Trey Hendrickson actually coming here. And frankly, you wouldn't be a good GM if you're Andrew Berry if you're not picking up the phone and at least calling and seeing about his availability, if it's an option, what it would take to potentially land him. But let's face it too, like the Browns aren't in the most prudent financial situation either, with Deshaun Watson's contract still on the books and all these things. It's not like they can just, pay everybody out the ass either and be okay. Like they are in a bit of a phase where rebuilding, trying to get young quickly on the fly while also staying competitive. And while Trey Hendrickson helps with that, adding Trey Hendrickson at this stage of his career, as he's 30, would basically be like, that's like an all-in move. That's why I brought up the Bills, because the Bills would absolutely benefit from being like, hey, let's go add Trey Hendrickson to our defense, push the chips into the center of the table, and find a way to finally get past Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. But that's not where the Browns are at. The Browns are not in the business right now of making all-in moves, because they're not a team that's currently all in. They are a team that is trying to win while sort of rebuilding on the fly, as I mentioned, while trying to get young quickly. And so it doesn't make sense for the Browns to really make this move, even if they have expressed interest. Or maybe this was just the Bengals kind of floating this because they're basically telling Trey Hendrickson, all right, you want us to trade you? Well, here's the teams we're going to send you to. Because the other teams mentioned were like the Panthers, not in a very good spot. The Colts, not in a very good spot. Not places where Trey Hendrickson largely will want to play at this juncture of his career. And so for that reason, I don't think it's going to happen probably. And maybe they still figure this thing out and it gets resolved. It'll be fascinating to find out and see. But just thought it was interesting. And I did think it was interesting that the Browns popped up on the radar as a team that seemed to be expressing interest. Smart move by Andrew Berry to call, but I don't think it's going to happen because there's just no way the Bengals send him within the division. As Kevin Stefanski said, the Browns simply cannot keep everyone. And we'll talk about what that means for the wide receiver depth chart coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is officially back. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. My most competitive fantasy league is hosted on Yahoo Fantasy. It's the most fun I have playing fantasy football. My friends and I are enjoying playing Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's just one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you were more into the classics, though, that's okay. You can still play a head-to-head private league or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedon. All right, so with Kevin Stefanski talking about the quarterback situation and mentioning that he can't keep everybody and they can't keep everybody, which is true. They absolutely positively cannot keep everybody. And that's the key thing here, is that they have to make some tough decisions at certain places along the roster. And I think one of those places is going to be the wide receiver room. And the expectation is, as I talked about, I did a short on this the other day on Sunday. The expectation is that Isaiah Bond is going to join the fold here in Cleveland on what is reportedly going to be a multi-year deal. And so the multi-year part of that is key because it's supposed to be 3 years. It means the Browns see a future with Isaiah Bond beyond just this year. I thought it might be sort of like a, hey, here's a 1-year deal, prove it type of thing, whatever. Let's see what happens. But they are investing multiple years in this player. We don't know what the guarantees are on any of that. It might be something they can easily get out of, but still, they're signing him to a 3-year deal, which tells me they believe he's part of this franchise beyond just 2025. And so that throws an interesting wrinkle into this wide receiver room, into this wide receiver conversation. Who's going to stay? Who's going to go? What is the room going to look like? I'm curious who is getting forced out of the depth chart or out of the conversation because Isaiah Bond is now being added to the mix. And I got to be honest, it kind of feels like Diontae Johnson is now on the outside looking in at this point because I'm banking on the Browns only keeping 5 wide receivers at this juncture just because I still believe they might keep all 4 quarterbacks. And you got to find a place to cut somewhere. Browns love running 12 personnel under Kevin Stefanski. And so understanding that, they're going to do a lot of 2 tight end stuff, maybe they only need 5 wide receivers. Now, they still could keep 6 and maybe cut somewhere else, or maybe they keep 6 and they do only keep 3 quarterbacks, like more of a normal setup. And maybe Diontae makes it in that iteration of the depth chart or that iteration of the wide receiver room because he's at least shown you like the Pro Bowl talent is there, right? Like if you believe that about Diontae Johnson, this team doesn't really have a lot of room to cut former Pro Bowlers, right? They don't have a lot of talent at the wide receiver position to just cut former Pro Bowlers. And so understanding that, the 5 wide receivers that stand out to me as guys that are going to make this team, Jerry Jeudy, obvious. Jamari Thrash, who's had a brilliant camp and had a really good game on Saturday with Dylan Gabriel throwing the ball. I think he is absolutely a lock. I think he's been awesome. He might be the second best wide receiver on this team based off of camp right now. Cedric Tillman is making this team because the Browns still believe he has that next level he can get to and that he will get there this year. And they're expecting a big leap from him. I'm keeping DeAndre Carter. I think the Browns are sort of signaled in, like they didn't play him this weekend. They didn't need to see him. He's going to be their number 1 return guy. So I think DeAndre Carter is making this team for special teams purposes, maybe most of all, but also as a wide receiver. And then Isaiah Bond is going to be number 5 for me because, again, the multi-year deal part of this tells me they are thinking about having him be here longer term than maybe what some might have thought, or longer term at least beyond 2025. And so I don't think they're going to cut him after bringing him in and signing him to a 3-year deal like is being reported. So that's my 5 in the wide receiver room. Again, if you keep a 6th, Diontae's probably the next natural guy to keep. Gage Larvidan is probably more deserving than most of the other guys on this roster because his training camp has been awesome. He has been like a standout as an undrafted rookie guy, and I'd love to see more of what he brings to the table. There is a little bit of returning ability in his game. We've seen that play out the last couple weeks of practice. But ultimately it feels like Gage Larvidan, just because of his size and all that, probably ends up more as like a practice squad guy in the same way that it was probably trending that direction for Luke Floria, and may still trend that way for Luke Floria, who was released last week with the injury settlement, and so that they can hopefully clear room to bring him back at a specific time to the practice squad. But yeah, Gage is probably in that same sort of boat where he ends up being a practice squad guy. But he obviously has earned the right to be part of this conversation because of the camp that he's had. He's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun to watch him and follow his story and learn more about him throughout this training camp. And so I'd love to see him make the team, but I don't know if he's going to. But it's basically like him. Maybe there's a little bit of an argument for Caden Davis, and it's Diontae Johnson. And so I guess if you're keeping 6, Diontae Johnson probably makes it by default. the problem is, though, like Diontae has had, there was a moment where I felt Diontae might have been the number 2 wide receiver on this team. Like he was standing out at practice. He was, and that's the thing. Like once they put the pads on, you could tell like the Browns had a player in Diontae Johnson. He was running routes and getting separation. He was leaving guys sort of in like the spin zone as he was cutting to the outside on out routes. He was making a lot of plays. There was a number of times where he made some really nice catches on some balls that were thrown in good spots from quarterback. Like he was making some plays at practice, but in the games, it hasn't been there. And this past weekend, that the pick 6 by Dylan Gabriel that he threw, I believe he was supposed to be like the deep level of the levels concept play that they ran, and they all sort of got congested and conglomerated in the same exact place, and then he throws the pick 6. It wasn't a good play. Obviously, it wasn't what you want to see from Dylan Gabriel, but at the same time, he didn't really get a lot of help from his wide receivers, and Diontae was part of that. He hasn't looked as good in the games. He's dropped passes of late. He dropped a couple passes during the Eagle joint practices this week. Like in the key moments of training camp that you're looking, and the preseason, frankly, in the games where you're looking for him to make some plays and stand out the way that he had at practice back here in Berea, he hasn't. And so that's what's concerning for me is like, has he really earned a place on this roster? I'm not sure. Maybe the Browns decide when push comes to shove, hey, we're keeping 6 receivers. Maybe they decide not to keep the 4 quarterbacks, and that makes that a little bit easier. And then maybe there's still a place for Diontae Johnson because they're like, well, hey, this is still a Pro Bowl talent. Let's see if he can sort of turn himself around and get back on track here at the end of training camp and leading up to the season before we just cut bait completely. But this is a big week for him to sort of see if he's worthy of a roster spot at this juncture. And I don't know that he is. And if he's not, it could be the 5 that I mentioned sort of making the roster over him. Judy, Cedric Tillman, Jamari Thrash, DeAndre Carter, and Isaiah Bond, who is not signed officially yet by the team, but there's reports that he had come to Cleveland on Sunday to get a deal done, and it's going to be in the range of 3 years. And so the multi-year deal part of it tells me they are expecting him to be on this roster. So there you go. It's going to be interesting to see. There's about a week until roster cutdown day next Tuesday. And so we'll get a sense of how things are going to sort of fall in the coming days during practice this week as the stage starts to be set for week 1 of the regular season, and you'll get some starters sort of nailed down and whatnot. But the rest of the roster is going to be sort of where the conversations pick up, because how they sort through some of these other position groups and how many guys they keep at certain positions is going to be the key thing we're all focused on and talking about leading into next week. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Bets, where betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rogers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football futures. Or you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I'll talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.